So we're going to wrap up this module by talking about the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And, he is one of the only presidents he's the only president that serves more than 2 terms in office. And we're going to talk about primarily his New Deal platform. Because this is one of the ways that he is going to attempt, unlike Hoover, who did very little, to actually bring America out of the Great Depression. Now, you can give him credit for kind of being, active in this way, that he really actually does try and enact some policies that are going to help America out. But historians have argued whether or not the policies he put in place actually are what brought us out of the Great Depression. Because you could clearly see that really what ends the Great Depression is World War II and getting everybody back to work and all of that. But at least he tries to kind of get all of it going. So Roosevelt himself, I believe we've talked about him a little bit before. He's actually a pretty interesting background. And he had a wealthy upbringing. He was the son of a wealthy New York industrialist, and he was actually like a cousin to Theodore Roosevelt. So he wasn't like a brother or anything, but he was a cousin, maybe like a first cousin, I think. Anyways, he got involved with politics at a very young age, and he was a very strong supporter of Woodrow Wilson and the idea behind the League of Nations. And he was also, though, a major campaign coordinator and campaigned very hard for Al Smith. And if you don't remember who Al Smith was, he was the Democrat that got smoked by Hoover because he was Catholic, right? Smith ran during the 1924 and 1928 presidential elections and got beat in both, but Roosevelt was a supporter of his. And again, he'd been around politics for basically most of his life. He's from the wealthy class. And so, when he runs for election, he doesn't really have a really good idea of exactly how he's going to fix the Depression, but he does know that something has to be done. So he doesn't have very specific plans yet, but he does understand that something has to be done. And so he's going to boldly promise this New Deal for America. Hey, America, we're going to have, when I get elected, it's going to be a new deal. All right. And so one of those things that he kind of brought with him was, we're going to repeal prohibition. So we're going to bring alcohol back. And everybody was like, yay. By the time, he wants to come up with aid programs, balance the budgets, cut spending, all of these things are going to, are promises he's going to make because he's saying these are things that everybody hasn't been doing, so I'm going to do them. And people really buy into it because they're in the Great Depression and life sucks, and he's promising to make it a little bit better. Now, he actually puts forth, during his election, he makes a speech and he kind of makes this line. It's one of the most famous lines in all of American history. He's like, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, which is actually pretty close. It sounds great. What's that? Oh. Yeah, so so he's basically saying, guys, we don't have to fear this Great Depression. We don't have to fear the future. We have to fear that we're afraid. So if we're not afraid, there's nothing to fear, right? And so he's really a good leader. Simply put, nobody likes Herbert Hoover at this point. Everybody pretty much disliked him. And FDR is perceived as a man of action because even though while he's running, they'd be like, well, how are you going to cut spending and increase government aid? And he's like, well, it's a new deal. They're like, well, I've never heard of a deal like that, but at least you're trying to say you're going to do something, right? Hoover was just like, I ain't going to do it. Oh, people starving, that's your fault. So I mean, he ends up, really appealing to people. And, it's kind of a tried and true way of winning an election in America, to be honest with you. Just make a bunch of promises that you have no intention of carrying out, right? And so, everybody does it, like literally everyone. And so he's considered to be a man of action in this very desperate time of need, whereas Hoover was viewed at this point as basically a do-nothing president, which is really the legacy that he gets stuck with, that he basically did nothing while the country fell apart. And so it shouldn't surprise you that this becomes a landslide victory for FDR, who is the Democrat candidate. It's such a landslide win. And, it's really important that you understand it's such a landslide that FDR sees this basically as a mandate from the people. Now, there's a lot of people that look at FDR and go, he's the greatest president that we've ever had. He led us through World War II, got us out of the Great Depression. He also, you have to understand, increased during his, 12 years in office, he increased the office of the president, the size of the federal government, an incalculable amount. I mean, there were more people working directly under FDR than had worked for all presidents combined up to that point. And that doesn't even take into account everything else beyond that. I mean, he increased it from what's called the Executive Office of President, which are people that basically work directly under the president and all their staffs. I think it was at like the most that anybody had ever had was 600. By the time he finishes office, he has 100,000 people working directly for him that are getting government paychecks. So, all kinds of human welfare and social welfare and stuff like that. But, this is the election map of 1932. Now, understand something. He got 472 of 531 electoral college votes. Yeah, the only two that are not included here are, I believe, Hawaii and Alaska, right? Because now it's 435 or 535 is total electoral. So Hawaii and Alaska. Remember, Hawaii doesn't become a state until like late 50s, early 60s, way after World War II. And I don't think Alaska had become an official state yet either. Is that, I think at the end of World War II, they become an official state? Correct me if I'm wrong. I should know that, but I don't because I don't care. I can Google it. I don't need to remember it. So the story is more important. I know who bought Alaska, but William Seward, who was Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln, because that's an interesting story, but I don't remember the date that it became a state. Anyway, incredible lopsided victory. Here's what's crazy. He only got 7 million more votes than Hoover did. Right? 89% of the electoral vote, but he only got 57% of the popular vote. There's still a lot of people that still voted for Hoover. That said, I'm not voting for no Democrat, right? Which is kind of crazy when you think about that it was that lopsided. So here, what's the new deal? Well, this is the thing that he's talking about on the public campaign trail, and basically it's an economic recovery plan. And, again, these were pretty broad. They're going to cover, industry, agriculture, the use of relief funds for state and local government under federal direction. These are all important ideas to help get people out of the Great Depression and get things moving again. They're not going to fix everything, but, they're at least kind of setting some broad goals for this. So when he takes office, there's still a lot of questions. How exactly are you planning on do this? So shortly after his inauguration, he launches a plan called the 100 Days Plan. So basically what he does is from March 9th to June 16th of 1933, he decides that the first 100 days is going to be, we're going to make some drastic measures to try and get things back on track. And now, even today, we measure modern presidents by how much of the agenda that they promised during their campaign are they actually able to accomplish during their first 100 days in office. If you remember, you don't remember, you were like 3. Gosh, I hate that I'm getting old. Obama passed Obamacare within, I believe, the first 100 days of office. Most major legislation that is passed is done so, because you're coming off this high of being elected and the Congress and everybody's on board, and you go, hey, the people have spoken. These things that we promised, they want to see them done. And so you've got the fire behind you to get stuff done. And so he actually takes the step of closing all banks under what's called the Emergency Banking Act. So he basically said, hey, everybody, we're going to close all banks. And we are going to put them under government oversight. Okay? And basically, this still exists today. Basically, all banks are under the purview of what's called government regulators, who are supposed to basically keep track of the books of the banks to make sure that they're not, over leveraged, that they haven't given out more loans than they can afford to not have paid back and still be able to give the money back to their lenders. Does that make sense? So, which is kind of one of the major causes of the Great Depression, right? All those banks had given out too many loans, and nobody paid the money back, and then there was no money to give to the people. So now he's saying, hey, every bank is going to be accountable directly to the federal government, and if you get to the point where you've loaned out so much money that if nobody pays you back and everything goes to crap, you can't give the people their money back, then we're going to put a stop to it and say you can't do that. Right, Chesney? So, they're going to make sure you can't borrow money on margin. You're going to separate savings money from investment money, which is why you have like savings account and checking account, and you have like you have different ways to store your money. They're saying, hey, this is a savings account. Don't touch it. And so it's separate from your investment fund. They implement the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. It protects bank accounts, so if the bank goes bankrupt, that you can still get your money. And so it was just an absolutely necessary step to try and get America out of the Great Depression. It's one of the best things that FDR probably does as president. Like I said, he does greatly increase the size of the federal government. But, to shut them all down and have the government take over, it was very controversial. But considering that it was the banks that screwed everything up in the first place, it was necessary to have some oversight on what they were doing. But that racked up a little, a little discontent. But it was very effective. The next measure you call the ABCs of job and economic relief. The idea here is to use the government-funded initiatives and programs and various efforts to provide jobs, try and fix, the other parts that are wrong with the Great Depression, which is like nobody's working. At least also the Dust Bowl as well. So they launched this under FDR. This is the Conservation Corps, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. They launched that in 1933. The idea is reforestation and erosion control. So they say, hey, the Dust Bowl's going on. How are we going to fix it? Well, the first thing we've got to do to fix it is put something back in the ground to keep the dust from flying away, right? They tilled up all the plants, so there was no roots or anything holding the stuff in place. So they say, okay, well, we're going to go around and we're going to plant a bunch of trees and go and reforest the Great Plains. And this provides a job for people because you give them a shovel and you give them stuff and you go, hey, go plant some trees. Of course, it's going to take a long time to actually create roots that are going to keep stuff in place. But in the short term, it gave people jobs. And there's, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, where it pays farmers to actually take land out of cultivation. So basically they said, hey, look, we messed up. You're farming too much land. You've taken all. So here's what we'll do. We'll actually pay you not to farm. Because if you will let the ground rest for a couple years, maybe some grass will grow and all the dust will quit flying away and all the topsoil will quit going away. You know, we still need rain. This isn't going to fix the rain problem. But if you'll quit tilling it up in the midst of the Dust Bowl, they'd have a dust storm come through, and then they would go out and till up the field and be like, well, I got to plant something. What if it rains? Like after a dust storm. So it's like, stop doing that. Okay? The Public Works Administration also financed the construction of dams and bridges. Again, putting people back to work. And really just trying to get things done so that people have see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? People need jobs. Problem is now everybody works for the government. How's the government going to pay everybody? Well, the government doesn't make money. Government's not a business. Y'all know that, right? It's so weird. It's so weird that everybody thinks that banks aren't businesses when they are. And they think the government has a source and way to make money when it doesn't. A bank, y'all have it backwards. A bank is a business and the government should be for you. Why everybody thinks that banks are just for you and the government is a business, I don't understand. So obviously they're going to have to raise taxes like a lot. Yeah, that was afterwards. Of course, there's some anti-business reactions where the idea is if the businesses haven't gone so far to the extremes of overproduction and trying to monopolize things, or if they would pay their workers, they could have, fixed some of these problems in the Depression much sooner. And so he passes laws like the National Recovery Administration Act. It oversees fair competition and production limits and wage and work hours. And so basically they're saying, hey, you're not allowed to make a bunch of products that you're not going to sell just because. It sets wages and workers, which has been a topic for several, modules that we've talked about, that workers' rights. And it's really an effort by the president to kind of, take care of this. Then you have the Federal Securities Act, the FTC, is going to regulate stock offerings. It's going to hold businesses liable if they misrepresent their stock. So if they pump up their own stock to make their business look more valuable so their stock price goes up so that they can get more money out of the market for it, then they will be in big trouble. It's going to set standards of honesty and reporting, which are still big laws today. Every single quarter, businesses have to release their earnings numbers and their projections and all of these things. And the stock market, the day in the stock market is always a big fluctuation day when those things happen because businesses are not allowed to lie. So if the stock's been going up because everybody thinks, oh, iPhone's got a new phone coming out, and then 2 or 3 months go by after the phone comes out and everybody's like, it seems to have been selling well, so the stock goes up, and then the earnings report comes out and Apple goes, hey, actually, we only sold half of the iPhones we thought we were going to. People are going to be like, oh, crap, Apple's not doing as well. Sell, right? And the stock will go down again because it's going to go down to match the actual value. So they're required by law to do that. The SEC is also going to oversee regulations on stock. You can't do insider trading, and they want to inspire confidence in the stock market. The whole idea here is people no longer trusted the stock market. And so people were not taking what money they did have and investing it in businesses. So in order to get the stock market back going right, you have to inspire confidence. And the way to inspire confidence is to say, we will punish companies that do this dishonestly. You can't buy stock on margin anymore. You can't buy it with credit. You can't buy it with a loan. We're not going to allow you to do that. And so they're trying to fix some of these problems. There are problems that come out of this New Deal. The NRA gets bogged down with, bureaucracy, and it favors big business. And eventually, it gets ruled unconstitutional in 1935 because Congress says, hey, it's not the president's prerogative or power to just be able to do these things. That should belong to Congress. The president can't just wave and sign a piece of paper and just put these things in place. So So it's ruled unconstitutional and kicked out. And then for the due to the AAA, it does help prices rise, but because laborers and sharecroppers are hurt by the downsizing of production, they don't realize the same profit. So prices go up, but they're not growing as much or selling as much, so they still don't get a whole lot more money. But it's a process. You kind of have to take time to do this. That also ends up being ruled unconstitutional by 1936. Now, FDR kind of gets pissed off by all of this. He had all these New Deal plans. In all reality, it was helping some. It made people feel better. Was it making us come out of the Depression? It's hard to say. But he got really mad at the Supreme Court. And at one point said, if y'all are going to keep voting down my plans to help America, I'm going to add more justices to the Supreme Court and basically what we call pack the Supreme Court. That I'll have Congress add 5 more justices, and they'll all be people that I choose, and they'll never vote any of this stuff down. So he really kind of threw a fit and tried to abuse his office as president, to be completely honest. Like, freaking jerk. You might wonder how we jump, from an aggressive president, and he's very aggressive and he's trying to be active, and they say, hey, it's, unconstitutional. Well, if you're wondering how that actually goes, you have to go back to 1934 and 35 when a lot of people seem to think that this New Deal was very socialistic, that it was going too far, that it was making the government too authoritarian, that if you put the government in charge of everything, how do you ever get it back out of the hands of the government? And I think that that's a very good claim in a lot of ways. You had people like Father Charles Coughlin, who was a prominent New York priest. He advocated for nationalizing banks even, but people kind of pushed back and said, hey, look, socialism's bad. Like, we don't want socialism. And so people criticized him for going too far. Some criticized him for not going far enough, like Louisiana Governor and Senator Huey P. Long.
Didn't he get shot in the Capitol?
Yeah, he was super corrupt. He was a socialist. Yeah. He said we should share our wealth, that we should tax the rich and give it to the poor. That's literally what Huey P. Long stood for. I don't know why we named a bridge after him. Yeah, probably so. What a jerk. On the other side of the coin, FDR is bolstered by the role that his wife plays, and we do have to give her some credit when we talk about prominent women politically. In the first several centuries of American history, we get Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, and it's worth pointing out that FDR is interested in national unity. It's really one of the most important things to the Americas that he believes is going to help them recover from the Depression, and that's to unite them. And he thinks that's a positive thing, and so he really needs a good PR person that can go out and really say, see, my husband loves you, and he wants what's best for America. Well, who better than your wife, right? And she is actually very good and very personable and very kind. And she says that, her husband's doing things that are good for the soul of America. And so she becomes very prominent on the radio, and she discusses problems and gives voice to those who felt like they didn't have a voice, and becomes a very comforting voice for the people in the nation who just felt like they had been ignored. And so she played a very big part of his success as president as well. FDR continues to pass these different acts, and he starts a different administration with executive orders like the Works Progress Administration. He's going to provide government jobs to the jobless in areas where they can do, whatever he can pay them to do, basically. I'm just going to give jobs to jobless people. Great. How are you going to pay them? The National Labor Relations Act, these are not exciting. I understand that, but you just need to understand that FDR, all of these things put more power in the hands of the government. Everything that he enacted took power out of the hands of private citizens and put it in the hands of the government. Now, Hoover may have done nothing, but his entire thing was the government should not get involved in all of these things. The entire idea of capitalism is that people should figure out how to work it out on their own. FDR is the exact opposite of that. He is saying the government is, because it's for the people and by the people and of the people. Remember, this is the government's job to help people out. So he is putting more and more and more and growing the government bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then guess what? The government never gets smaller. It only ever gets bigger. Okay? So just understand, Social Security Act, it mixes federal and state pension. It gives aid to poor and aged and disabled, right? Then you get to the 1936 election, and he wins by an even larger landslide. An even larger landslide. 523-8. This time he wins by 11 million votes. There's only 43 million votes counted. So, he gets, 2/3 almost of every single person. 2 out of every 3 people that voted in America voted FDR. That's insane. Now, his second term is characterized, by battling the Supreme Court, as we said. 9 justices, 4 of them were conservative, most of them were old, and they voted against FDR's policies. And so by the time he gets to February of 1937, FDR says, well, the heck with y'all, I'll just add 6 more justices. And because there's nothing in the Constitution that says how big the Supreme Court should be, but most people see this for what it is, which is even his own Democrat Party in the Senate and in the House are like, dude, you can't do that. Everybody will just understand you're just trying to get what you want. That doesn't seem like democracy. That seems like you're trying to become king a little bit. Like, if you won't do what I say, I'll just change the rules. You can't do that, dude. So even they push back against this. And so that never came to pass, but it just kind of goes on to show that, if FDR had really got what he really wanted, would he have ever, if he hadn't died, what would the government have become? All right. Second, the last of the second New Deal, the second deal, the Farm Securities Act, this loans to tenants and sharecroppers to buy farmland. The Housing Act creates federal projects that are going to build housing for, poor people that don't have homes. The Fair Labor Standards Act is going to ban child labor. It's going to implement a minimum wage. It's going to say a max work week of 40 hours. And so, again, a lot of these things had already been done by individual states and localities. Now he's doing it at a federal level. So he's saying, hey, I know that you've already done this at a state level the way you should have, but that's not good enough. If the federal government doesn't do it, then that's not good enough. So basically he's saying the federal government is far more important than your state and local government. So even though you've already passed these laws, now we're going to do it at a federal level. We're going to take the option out of your hands as individuals in states, and we're going to say the federal government says you have to. Which again, depending on how you view the role of the government, you might see that as an overstep. However, this does influence the quality of life for average Americans. There's mixed results, of course, but it's helpful to labor unions the most. It helps women, but minorities are really not helped all that much by this stuff. He doesn't really do anything to address racial issues, particularly in the South. He does almost nothing to address Jim Crow laws. And so most of these government jobs are going to go to white people exclusively. It kind of doesn't necessarily fix some of that stuff. The Depression does not come to an end, though. So how effective is it really? Because the Depression continues. You wouldn't say the Depression is really over until 1945, when we get out of World War II. The economic system, is not entirely altered, although he did as much as he could to really kind of change our full economic system. You know, it really kind of stays very capitalistic in the hands of the elite, and little is done for those who have no political power. So the very poorest of the poor that don't vote and don't have any say, like, they really didn't get anything out of it. But you do get Social Security and the Wagner Act and political realignment of the 1930s. How do the average Americans deal with the Depression? Well, they turn to movies and radio and music as an escape from these harsh realities. Comedies and dramas and gangster movies and films and radio. People look for entertainment to take their minds off of how terrible life was. And so those ideas of mass culture, that there's these aspects of culture. You can go watch a movie at the movie theater for 5 cents. And everybody goes because life sucks. It's not like you got a job, you might as well go to the movies, right? You have musicians like Woody Guthrie who, gets caught up and Woody Guthrie, yeah, like Toy Story Woody, named after Woody Guthrie. Yeah. Let me see. This machine kills fascists. Like someone who says you have to think a certain way or act a certain way. Like everybody should be the same. Yeah, with music, because he was a folk storyteller. So like he would say, he spoke, I mean, he was kind of a socialist, kind of almost a communist, dadgummit. He was very supportive of unions and workers, and he really was. And so he basically, like, through his music would put out these messages of very, like, anti-government kind of messages. So he's basically saying that music helps keep everybody from being the same and gives you a way to express ideas. Now, he wrote the song, "This Land Is Your Land."
Can you play it?
No. Yeah, that's Woody Guthrie. I mean, he was a folk singer. Yeah. The New Deal goes into decline. We said cutbacks for relief agencies in 36, 37. You see a slump hit the economy, and Roosevelt gets blamed, and he resorts to huge government spending, as I said. And by 1938, you really have a revival of the Republican Party. It was pretty much dead by, the beginning of FDR's term. And now you see the Republican Party coming out and having some stuff that they can actually be like, this guy's turning our country into socialism. Like, the government is way too big, and so, yeah, there's some of that. This is kind of, you can go and look at some of this. This is really just the things that were enacted that FDR did that helped grow the government and try to get out of the Depression. There's a lot of them. I mean, an insane number. And then, yeah, there you go.